I think we've created a fear in society about the negative parts of what makes us human. And I would argue that it's really important, actually, that when we do feel negative about whatever it might be, that we lean into it more than we are. Don't fear it, lean into it, because actually they give us really good signs. The idea of feeling guilty. Now, if you feel guilty for something, that should be a sign for us to say, that's something I don't want to do again. I've done something that has created this feeling inside me. That's not a behaviour that I want to repeat or an action I want to repeat.
Good evening, Nick. How you doing? I see you sporting some new headgear there.
Mate, I've got some cans. I'm getting used to them. I'm not quite sure how they look, but this is all part of my new podcast setup. We've got lights, we've got cans, we've got better microphones. I'm super excited to have a chat with you today. And yeah, it feels a bit weird having your voice like directly in my ear this time, but hopefully for the listeners, the audio will sound slightly better as a result. So yeah, I'm in good form. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I'm in a different setup. You've got this, all the books in the background and the headphones and the microphone there. I'm sitting in my sister's place so I can nab the Wi-Fi from her here in Brighton because my hotspot won't quite cut the mustard at the moment. So I'm still in Brighton. I had a nice, productive weekend of getting a few jobs done in the house, which is good. And then had about 10-15 minutes to wander to the beach this afternoon around 4 o'clock, or headed down on the bike. So it's only about 4 minutes on the bike. And then did a 20-minute walk along the beach. And it was just before sunset, some nice clouds there. I took a little snap to send to my friend who I'm enticing to come over at the weekend down from London. I said, like, this is what I'm seeing right now. This is what it's all about. Just seeing the sunset, seeing the sea. So that feels quite good. So I don't think my day's been as hectic as yours. Yours sounds like pretty full on from what you were saying. So I'm hoping we have
I haven't left my desk yet, buddy. Since this morning. I mean, I got up, I was very proactive, very proud of me. I got up, I did a 90-kilometre bike ride, 5K run, pre-work. It's kind of my long distance day this morning. So I'm up super early.
Did you say
90? 2.5 hours.
This morning?
Yeah.
What?
This morning. That's my Monday routine now.
On your machine or out and about?
No, on my machine. Yeah. Whilst watching Warriors in the Air on Apple. And the Great Beer Run. I managed to get a movie in as well. I got a movie in, the Great Beer Run. It was, I think Zac Efron.
Yeah, speaking of Zac Efron movies, I watched his latest one at the weekend called The Iron Claw. Have you come across that one before? It's just coming out this week. And I haven't.
It sounds like a superhero movie. Is it?
No, it's not. It's actually a true story about this wrestling family called the Von Erichs. And they were a big wrestling family, about 4 or 5 brothers in the 1980s. And they were very powerful dynasty, if you like, in the WWE, WWF pre-era. Although it's a massively tragic story, their life. I won't go into it, but just a Google search will show you what's what. It's actually good. But Zac Efron bulked up massively. He's huge. He must have been using all sorts of stuff to get that big. It's ridiculous, his physique. But yeah, I'm starting to warm to Zac Efron. I think it was, I didn't really think about him too much in terms of being any good, but I've seen a few movies of his and I thought he's actually all right. He's quite good. And actually he's got a good show on Netflix, I think, all about longevity or something along those lines.
I have, yeah, he has. I've watched some of that as well. But yeah, he's very talented. So yeah, I did that this morning. Felt like I'd had a really proactive morning, and then since then I've been at my desk and I've been wed to it all day. Well, it's time now, it's 7:23, so since 9 o'clock this morning I think I've left twice actually. I left very briefly before this call to go to the loo, and I had lunch at about 3 o'clock, nipped out for literally 10 minutes to make myself a sandwich. So yeah, I'm pretty wedded to my desk today. Not a fun Monday, lots to get through, but a productive one, and I'm probably going to be back on my laptop after this call. So yeah.
Although I think you wanted to talk about, I guess it was a wider issue, but the idea of apathy, and it's quite funny because, and we can discuss what apathy means in a moment, but for those of you that just have the general idea of what apathy means, your morning and your day sounds very the opposite of that, right? In terms of you were super productive this morning with the 90-kilometre bike ride before work is insane, by the way. And then, yes, being wedded to your desk all day, even though it's not great, there must have been some level of productivity happening there as well. So I guess my question before we think about what apathy is what is it that's jumped to mind on that? What's prompted this, do you think?
Well, I think to answer your question, yeah, I certainly haven't been apathetic today because I've been incredibly connected to what I've been doing, albeit work-related tasks. I've had a connected level of focus today. I think I wanted to talk about apathy because for me, it's a real, and it will. When you look out for it, you can see it around you, and I think it's a dangerous state. I think it's arguably not a million miles away from a suicidal state potentially, but I think it's a sign of complete disconnectedness from one's emotions. I think that's where it differs from others. It's therefore disconnectedness from our authentic selves, and I think there are people out, more people than we probably think, are in apathetic states, which is worrying. But the idea of apathy, which I know we're going to define it and we'll probably talk about it in more detail in a bit. The reason it came to mind is I had some conversations over the weekend about a woke society. Now, just using the word woke can be relatively controversial these days, right? But I think we are living in a society where it's almost frowned upon or dangerous, or we perceive it to be dangerous, to think negatively. Now, apathy, I would say, is rooted in negativity when we see the world a particular way. And therefore, it'd be easy for someone to assume that if we want to avoid becoming apathetic, then we need to be positive, right? But actually, I would argue that there's some dangerous elements to that, that if we believe that anything but being positive is automatically a bad thing, which notice I use a different word from negative, as I use the word bad quite deliberately. I think it's quite dangerous because we'd end up, using social media, which you've talked about before, to look at everyone else's lives and feeling like if we don't feel that way, what's the point? If we don't feel that way, then my life must be, it's not good enough. My life needs to change. That we need to be positive all the time, positive about politics, positive about the way we view other people, positive about the work that we do, connected to everything that we do all of the time, and positive about every moment of the day we spend with a friend or a family member. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on us individually to be this thing. And there's a big movement in positive psychology, which I'm a huge fan of, by the way. And I'm a massive fan of positive. I've got books all across my bookshelf on positive psychology. But I wouldn't want to limit myself to being only open to positive psychology in a coaching context. And I think that we've created a fear in society about the negative parts of what makes us human. And I would argue that it's really important, actually, that when we do feel negative about whatever it might be, that we lean into it more than we are. Don't fear it, lean into it, because actually they give us really good signs. One of those might be, for example, and we mentioned off air a little while ago, the idea of feeling guilty. Now, if you feel guilty for something, that should be a sign for us to say, that's something I don't want to do again. I've done something that has created this feeling inside me, and you always talk about leaning into the feelings we have and using our feelings inside as triggers or signs. If we feel guilty, that should be a really good sign that that's not a behavior that I want to repeat or an action I want to repeat. That in itself is a positive thing. Where it becomes dangerous, of course, is if we hold on to that guilt. And I think we hold on to those things a lot more if we don't lean into them and accept them for what it is. And we push it aside, we bury it into our subconscious because we believe we have to be our positive version of ourselves 110% of the time. And I think as a result of that, we're actually burying loads of these negative emotions into our subconscious, and it makes us unsure of who our authentic selves really are. We lose our sense of self. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot to unpack then. I guess my first question, which might be, well, no, that's all right. And it might be that my first question throws this all into disarray anyway. But maybe my challenging self would say, why are you labeling apathy as a negative emotion? I think that maybe, and this might come to our definition of apathy anyway, I feel
Sure.
like apathy is a neutral emotion, if we can call it an emotion or a state. And the reason I say that is I do find that there is, I mean, I work with lots of young people, as you know, and I do find that there is, I wouldn't call it apathy as such, but I would definitely find that, like a typical teenager, whenever I was asked about anything, I'd be like, oh, all right, or this, that, that. There'd be very monosyllabic answers and not really giving much away. And I presume that adults thought that I was quite apathetic towards things, right? You didn't really care about things one way or the other. I think that's the difference where I guess I'm seeing apathy is not necessarily a negative emotion, because I think negative emotions have a level of charge to them, a level of energy to them,
I would
as do
agree.
positive emotions. So negative and positive emotions have energy to them. I feel that apathy is that grey zone. It's that black and white movie, where you just maybe. I mean, it's kind of teetering towards the idea of ambivalence. Apathy is a little bit stronger than ambivalence, because ambivalent, you're not really bothered one way or the other about the outcome of something, whereas apathy, I guess, you have a general lackluster approach to whatever life in general could be.
Maybe we have a different. I think we probably do differ in our versions. Maybe, I mean, it's okay, right? Let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation. I mean, for me, I think apathy is a reflection of when we've lost all hope. So I would define it as the suppression of all emotions, where you don't just suppress, resist, or even hate. As you say, negative gives you a charge to it. So if you're negative about something, or you feel like something is bad, that can create a charge that allows us to want to take an action. So hate is a positive emotion in the sense that it's not a positive emotion in all senses, but it can be in the sense that it can give us the charge required to take an action on something. And that may be a negative action, but there's still some charge involved, right? So I used the wrong phrase there to say it's positive, because it's not. But the idea being that there's still something in it. I think with apathy, though, we kind of suppress all our emotions. Like we don't want to do anything. It doesn't matter if someone labels us bad, good, indifferent. We just don't care. We don't hear it. We're in that position of we've just given up on resisting any emotion. Feeling happy, feeling hopeful, feeling excited doesn't really matter. It's just all suppressed. It's disowned. We resist it. We just resist all feelings altogether. For me, that's apathy. That's why I would say it's quite close to being dangerous on that suicidal side of things, because when you've just given up on everything, nothing really tickles you or challenges you or excites you either way, including the bad. You can kind of say there's an earthquake happening, or you're going to get hit by a meteorite, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a suppression. I think that's because the idea or the word suppression to me means an active resistance to. So by suppressing an emotion, you feel that emotion and you'll try and squash it down, right? Apathy for me is a lack of that emotion or that feeling in the first place to some degree. So it's not like there's an active denial of that emotion or trying to resist that emotion. And also it's more like I can feel apathetic and this might be where we differ, what's the distinction between apathy, laziness, procrastination, and so on. I guess the difference maybe for, say, procrastination and apathy might be with procrastination, there is the outcome that you know that you want, and you know that if you got it, you would feel good about it, but you're stopping yourself from doing the work because of X, Y, Z reason. Whereas apathy, I guess you don't see hope in the future, is how I'm understanding you define it, or you don't see something along like that. Yeah. Because to kind of tally it into sort of suicidal thoughts is quite a strong. I feel like there's a lot of people out there who feel apathetic to things. It could be life in general. It could be certain activities. It could be work. But I don't think it's anywhere close to being that level.
I think that's okay. We're allowed to have different distinctions. I think our listeners will have different distinctions as well. And I don't think necessarily we need a conversation on what the exact definition is. Maybe we need to go and have a look on a dictionary in a minute and see how a dictionary defines it. I haven't looked, but that's my understanding of what it means for me. And obviously it means slightly different for you, and that's fine. But I think that what I wanted to raise as a conversation, and I may have labelled it with apathy, but I think it's the idea that we suppress, whether you link it with apathy or not, Harry, the idea that we suppress those negative emotions because there's a social view that or belief in ourselves that we have to be positive all the time. So what I would say is, particularly in children, and I've talked about this on one of our early shows, where I used to say something to my kids growing up, which actually I never had any idea had any impact on them until many years later. And the thing that I said I'm not proud of was, only boring people get bored, right? harmless, I thought, saying at the time. I was trying to, get them to do something on board, Daddy, whatever age it was. And it would usually promote some kind of action on their part because they don't want to be seen as being boring. And I realized when you unpick that, it's not a nice thing to be saying. And I was using that very flippantly, not really thinking about the power behind those words. It was many years later that one of my children came out and were really almost panicked that they were bored. They were scared to tell me they were bored because they had associated that with being a really bad thing, a really bad emotion. And I think often when we're growing up as kids, parents will often say certain things that don't do that because that is bad. Don't, do that action, that is bad. You need to do the housework or else it's a bad thing. So we're kind of conditioned that lots of things are bad. So in a result of that as well, then we try and, overcome that by always trying to do things that are good. And sometimes those things we're trying to do as good, actually, if we unpick it in a coaching context, will often be we do things because we actually seek our parental approval all the time, even in adult life. Many, many adults are out there in very executive, senior level positions, still taking career paths and journeys. They've been all about seeking their parental approval. They're always trying to show them that they're doing the right things because they were conditioned much younger that if they did the wrong things, that was seen as bad. But I think if we build that out into a bigger context here, I think the idea of social media as well, and we've talked about that in separate shows, I think there's a whole movement, a woke movement or a positive psychology, whatever it is, whatever we want to term it, where people now are scared to lean into their negative emotions. And I'm just keen to find out from your perspective what you think the impact of that is, or whether you're even seeing the same thing.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing something different. I think that I don't necessarily see the overstatement of leaning into positive emotions. I feel that, if anything, our views are very clouded by our immediate circle and the circumstances we're in. So if we're reading lots of positive psychology books and we're doing our coaching courses and we're doing all this, we might see all that around us and think, well, we're being told to be positive all the time. Whereas if I overhear my mum watching an episode of EastEnders or putting the news on, I don't feel like there's a positive message coming through there. I feel like there's a lot of negativity coming through there. I also would make the distinction between, I think with the concept of being woke, or whatever that's supposed to mean, is very distinctly different from an idea of feeling positive all the time or seeing the good in things all the time. In fact, for me, wokeism is quite the opposite. It's having an intolerance to other people who you feel view the world in a different way that you believe to be intolerant. This is the irony of it, of course. And I don't really want to get into wokeism because actually it's a bit of a can of worms. But in terms of positive and negative,
neither do I.
Yeah, in terms of positive and negative, one thing I would say is, and I like to bring it back to my physics roots, is we live in a relativistic universe, right? We live in a relativistic universe. What that means is everything is something relative to something else. Therefore, you cannot have a positive emotion without a negative emotion because it's on a scale of one to the other. Just like there can't be a good emotion or a bad emotion. It's just an emotion that is there to teach you something or serve you something. Or someone defines that as being a bad emotion, like boredom to be a bad emotion. Boredom's not a bad emotion, right? Boredom could be a good emotion because it leads to creativity, it leads to changing our way of thinking, it leads to new inventions. So
trying new things.
Try new things. Nothing is good nor bad, but thinking makes it so, as Shakespeare said. And as we say, nothing has any meaning except for the meaning you give it. So I think that's probably what I would say is that, and I do feel like, yes, you're right to some degree in that there is more of a stance or a push towards positivity in some areas. And I feel like that's really just coming because previous to, say, positive psychology, people were studying what was wrong with people rather than looking at people that were right and thinking what was right with those people. Do you know the story, I think it was about the planes in Second World War, where they were trying to arm the planes so that they would resist the German fire. And they kept looking at the planes that were coming back into land in the airfields, and they were seeing where they were being shot up. And so then they were putting armoured plates around those bits. But it wasn't until they twigged that actually they should be thinking about if they were being shot up in those points and still making it back, that wasn't the problem. It was the other planes that weren't making it back that were being shot up in those other things. And I think positive psychology is similar to that, in that previous to that, we were looking at a bad or an ill person in some way, shape or form and seeing what made them ill. Positive psychology came along and said, hang on a second, rather than looking at an ill person and trying to see how we can make them better, why don't we look at people who are in good states and see what they're doing, which is this plane analogy, see what they're doing and then do more of that. And so I think because there is now this pendulum swing, you might feel like there's a more of an idea that we have to be happy with.
Yeah, I probably do. I mean, I think that's why I'm keen to say that I'm a massive fan of positive psychology, but like everything, you need balance. And I just think maybe we've moved too far in one direction of the pendulum. And I think that there's something to be said in terms of leaning into things that are negative. And sometimes when we do that, actually, you find the positive anyway. But I think there's a resistance to lean into the negative things, and certainly publicly. So, if you bring this into male mental health in particular, there's a real fear in men talking openly. I mean, it's got a lot better, without a doubt. It's been massively covered and supported, and which is great, right? But there's still a fear among men in talking about how they really feel, and I think that's often down to a perception that if they were to be open about how they feel as a man, that it's seen to be less manly or weakness or whatever, right? But actually, we know that if they do speak about their and confront their negative emotions in the instance, it will often result in a positive outcome because they've shared it, and that problem shares problem halved, and they've got a community and things like that. But I think because there's these constructs that we create, social media has a lot to answer for, that we have to be a certain way and have to always be positive and upbeat all the time. I mean, I think of people like Robin Williams, on the outside was always this individual who just radiated fun and positivity and all these things, yet behind the scenes there were all these traumas and things going on in his life. And obviously he did end up taking his own life, which is terribly sad, and something that I don't think many of us would have predicted. And of course we didn't know him personally, and I'm sure people close to him may have been able to understand more. But I do think there's a place at the moment. I see it in the workplace all the time. I work in career coaching as well, in particular, people made redundant, and they're trying to keep a brave face on it for their families, or they're trying to keep a brave face on it for. Why do you need to keep a brave face on it? Like, lean into where we are. Look at the opportunity actually that this may have provided for you. This is the first time potentially in 15, 20 years you have to actually take a genuine break to reassess what it is you want to do. There are loads of positives here. You have more time now to be with your family while you make that assessment, and you have to unpick them and reframe, which is a big part of this, right? But I think there's so much involved in where my head is, which is why this is a little bit of a mind dump. But the idea of letting go of expectations that often are started on by parents like me, where they say certain things without realizing the impact that might have later. And when we let go of those expectations, then you can start really being authentically you. And expectation, I think, is often combined with this idea that we have to be a certain thing or a certain way, i.e. a man has to be this strong individual who doesn't show emotion. Now, I know we've got a lot better, but that's still there. So I think that's part of it. Positive psychology is absolutely great, but in balance.
It's interesting you talk about, as you were talking about that, men don't show emotions, don't cry. I was quite literally thinking about the movie last night with Zac Efron, The Iron Claw. And I'm not going to give too much away, aside from the fact he at one point is with his children. He's got two young boys in this particular scene who are probably about 7 or 8 years old, and he's crying for a very valid reason. But he says to his boys, he goes like, I'm sorry boys, I'm sorry for this. And they were like, what? Sorry for what? Oh, I'm crying. Men don't cry. And then the boy said to him, it's okay to cry, right? Right? You're meant to cry, or something. They said something along those lines. And it was interesting because earlier in the movie, his dad was quite like an atypical guy from growing up in the 50s and 60s. He was a tough guy, wasn't showing emotions, didn't let them show emotions, didn't really want them to talk about things to the parents. They just said, like, sort it out amongst yourselves with the brothers. And it felt like in this particular scene, Zac Efron was being given permission by his children to show emotions that he had previously wanted to show that weren't able to show. And it's partly a sign of the times, because I do remember what was this? What was it? Whether it was Friends, it might have been Friends. We might have talked about this before, where it suddenly became okay to hug another man. I think it was on
Yeah.
Friends. You saw men hugging, but also I think it happened a bit earlier, maybe in Miami Vice, might have been the show in the 80s. But it was something that was not seen much of. So there's definitely been this cultural trend to change that somewhat and show more male emotions. I think there is definitely an influx. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day, actually, a couple of retreats that have cropped up on my radar. One in Hertfordshire, actually, a men's retreat. He's also looking at one in Portugal, I think. But there's this idea and there's this need for men to be able to connect with other men in a way that allows them to be vulnerable, but also that vulnerability and being in a safe environment gives them strength, because you get strength from other men as well, and showing each of you your vulnerability, which isn't a weakness, it's actually a strength. And I think a lot of the time, I remember once in my yoga teacher training, I think it was, maybe it was another time, but we were talking about vulnerability, and we were talking about how actually when you attack in martial arts, you're actually very vulnerable, because when you're in defense mode, you might have your hands in a particular position to protect your body. As you go into an advanced mode, you open up quite a lot more of your body. So you actually, or you could be pulled, or all sorts of things. So actually, you can't have a lot of time progress in this analogy or metaphor without that vulnerability being there as well. And so when you come together in these men's groups, and women do it in women's groups, well, showing that vulnerability is not weakness. Actually, it's a sign of going for strength. But it's still a challenging thing. It's still a challenging thing for a lot of people, because of that fear of being judged and being less than, and whatever else might be coming.
Yeah, I think that's, you probably hit the nail on the head with that fear of judgment. Right. So I guess what I'd like today's show to do, if it does anything at all, is to remind people that actually, if we were able to let go of that resistance to that emotion or that judgment, then, and you actually just sit there and sink into our emotions, let them take over, whatever those emotions are. They might be positive, they may not be, but sink into them, lean into them. Number one is we'll probably really enjoy the experience, because actually when we do that thing, when we let go of all the attachment to the things we think we should be, and let go of the resistance, the judgment, all the things that you've just mentioned, we go into a new space, right, where we're authentically us. And I think that's probably where, and I had a bit of a mind dump at the start of today's show, but I think we're in a world at the moment which values constant positivity then over authenticity. I think we want to get to authenticity, but I think not everyone's there, because we're in that place of constant positivity. And whilst the two can be part of the same, authenticity for me is where we actually want to get to. And to be authentically ourselves, we've got to let go. And I'm going back to the book of Letting Go, which obviously has had a big transformational impact on my life. But the idea of letting go of the attachment to feelings, the attachment to the things we think we should, the person we think we should be or ought to be, our egos. The ego that shows the best version of ourselves to the outside world, but actually we want to go back to a place of authenticity. And if that authentic self in that moment is not necessarily a positive emotion, I think that's okay, because you're actually being us. I mean, I had a bit of a cry earlier today, right? I'm admitting it. I've got a dog that's been with me for 16 and a half years, Buster. You've met him several times, Harry, right? He is not on a good way. He's gone downhill very, very fast. Now, I've known, he's been part of my married life. Been married with my partner now for 21 years. We've been married for 4 months longer than we've had the dog. And, we've got a 14-year-old daughter. He's been with us our entire lives, but we know we've got a vet appointment tomorrow morning, which we've called, and I'm a bit nervous about what he might say. Now, when we had that conversation with my wife, both of us ended up breaking down into tears, or had sweaty eyes, as I often like to put it, right? But for me, that was just letting go of emotion. That wasn't a positive place, but it was also a chance for us to then reflect on all the positive things we'd had. We had a little conversation for the short break I did have today. We chatted about some of the stories we had with him, some of the great memories, and it led to a place of positivity in the sense that it allowed us, we lent into the negativity and we found positivity in the sense that it reminded us of all the good stories and good times we'd had with him. We know tomorrow is still going to be difficult, but I'm going to lean into that as well. We've got to go, tomorrow's going to be a difficult conversation. We need to be authentically what is right for Buster and what's right for the situation, and not do what we necessarily is right for us. Does that make sense? So that's probably why this conversation's come up. But I had a good old cry earlier today.
I mean, yeah, well, I think I came to tears last night watching this Iron Claw, but now you're talking about your situation, and I'm sure you've seen this movie, but I'm reluctant to almost mention it again. But Marley and Me, that's what this else. But I think when it comes to this negative positive dichotomy, I actually feel like we are I know inherently we've got this negative bias in terms of a protection mechanism, and it helps us evolutionary evolve. But when I think about a lot of the things I learn from nature, but I also learn from babies. Babies inherently are positive. Yes, they cry, but only for certain things, right? When they're tired, they're hungry, sometimes when they've done a poop, or they're uncomfortable in some way, or they're being neglected. But other than that, they're generally happy, right? When I think about my niece, who I haven't actually been able to see today, she must have gone to bed already, but she is just super happy most of the time, right? And probably 90% of the time, and then not 10% when she needs something. And I feel like we, through society, have had the opposite, because you talk about society telling us to be positive. Now, I'm wondering whether that's actually more swayed by this social media landscape where you're seeing not necessarily positive, but you're seeing highlights. So I think that might be the distinction, is that we've been told to live our lives like a highlight or like a trailer, and the trailer shows the best bit of the movies a lot of the time. A lot of the time in the movie there's downtime. The trailer's got the best bits in. And when we watch a social media feed, you're watching the highlights of someone's movie. And I'm wondering whether that is
I think
where
it's more than just that. I'm interjecting. I think it's more than that. I think if you have a quick look on Instagram or any social media feed, I know you're not really on those channels, and neither am I really, but when you do, it feels like every second post, or maybe it's because I've got it set up for the adverts that come to me based on the work that I do. I feel like every second thing is based on positive mindset, positive mindset, positive mindset, positive mindset. It's like boom, 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 boom on repeat.
now I'm getting things about garage doors and roofs because of things I'm in relation with. So there is definitely, I mean, look, obviously, if your social media feed, you're following people like Tony Robbins and Zig Ziglar and looking up these books and everything else, then the algorithm's going to show you that. Now, I actually think that I think it's a great thing, right? Positivity, and I do think that we are so trained in that negative through news feeds and watching the news and TV shows like EastEnders, where we feel there's so much more negativity than there is positive. I actually argue that there's way more positivity in the world. Now, of course, I have a bit of a bias there, but that bias was swayed through things like doing that gratitude practice since 2011. And actually today, I see it's the 19th of February as we record this. And today, I need to put this in my gratitude list later for my family, is the 50th anniversary to the day that we started our family gratitude list. And I can honestly say that I feel like feeling gratitude every single day for things, whether you're having a good or a bad time, it's like a muscle, and it has trained me, and it's trained my mum, I think, to cope with things of recent events way, way better than otherwise we would have done. Now, that's not to say that we're not leaning into that negative. It's like you're studying a bit of Zen Buddhism at the moment, and often when I tell my students in class, yoga class, when they're doing Shavasana, which is the last pose where you lie down, a lot of time thoughts come into your head. Now, we've discussed this before with meditation, right? The idea is not to have no thoughts. The idea is to see those thoughts as if you're looking out a window and you see clouds passing in the sky. You see the cloud, but you're not trying to grasp onto the cloud. You're not trying to keep the cloud in its view. And it's the same with these emotions. It's see and recognize these emotions as they come up, but not to be attached to those emotions, and know that you are beyond those emotions, right? We've talked about this before, the I am happy, I am sad, I am apathetic. It's a fleeting time. Now, that fleeting time might be a few moments, it might be minutes, it might be hours.
I don't think the things you've said I disagree with at all. I think we probably see this in slightly the same way. I mean, letting go is letting go of attachment to all emotions, right? And if you take it from the Buddhist Zen example, it's letting go of everything, right? So there is no attachment. That's a big part of their core system. But I think also just leaning into what you've mentioned there, there's a difference between burying and not acknowledging an emotion at all to acknowledging and letting one go. So acknowledging a moment when you feel sad rather than I can't feel sad, that is bad. It's the labeling of the emotions we need to come away from, labeling certain things as bad that we need to get away from. I would also say that in your example there about your gratitude diaries, I totally agree. So we now have, you'll be pleased to hear, we have a daily ritual of gratitude, which we do as a family every evening, right? It's been really good. And science tells us that after a month of doing these exercises, you actually change your mindset to become more positive. You start to look at the world more positively, which is great, right? As I said, I'm not saying positivity is bad in any stretch way or anything like that. But I think when you talk about gratitude and positivity are not the same thing. I think what gratitude does is it allows you to be thankful and live in a world, live in appreciation of things. And appreciation doesn't necessarily mean that everything still has to be positive. For me, then they're not necessarily one and the same. And I think that I couldn't agree more that daily gratitude's incredibly powerful tool for improving the way we see the world and improving positivity for sure. And I think there's lots of people that do gratitude journals and struggle with them because they think they've got to write lists and they just eventually they run out of ideas. But there's writing a list and being grateful for something, and then there's a living in gratitude is different to being grateful for something, if that makes sense. And I think what I find interesting here, I don't know if I'm articulating myself very well, it's because I'm thinking here about how I want to articulate it. But going back to what you're very passionate about, the idea of vitality, right, and living in maximizing our lives so we can be superhuman. A lot of this comes in grounding ourselves in nature and appreciating the world around us, as you say, taking a different journey and actually identifying things in a mindful way to say, you know what, I've never noticed that before. Isn't that beautiful? Or noticing the sunset or noticing the waves or the beach or the things like that. The things that we can take for granted. And I think that doesn't have to have a positive or a negative emotion attached. It's not about that. It's just about, as you say, identifying how you feel in the moment, acknowledging it, which is the bit I think we're not doing enough of. So if you are going back to that example earlier, that guy that wants to be vulnerable, but we don't often acknowledge the feelings. We push them back down into our subconscious. We don't let them come up. We don't acknowledge it for fear of judgment or whatever it is that we're fearing in that moment.
I actually think that the non-acknowledgement of emotions is a cultural and societal problem, in that what happens and what I feel happened is that when you are constantly distracted, you do not have the opportunity to sit with those emotions. And I've given this example before. I'm sure I used to wake up with a radio alarm clock and put the TV on before I go to work or go to school, and you're constantly distracted. And this is the case for a lot of people still today, right? Even worse. And I will remember, because I was talking to my mum the other day, because I'm trying to get her into doing something like yoga. And actually there was a yoga retreat that has cropped into my inbox from a company nearby for September. And I'm trying to see if she's open to the idea, because it's in Cyprus. It's only half an hour away from the flat that she's got there. And it would be a residential retreat, but you could tie it in. It would be quite nice. And she's like, I don't really like yoga. She's only done it once with me anyway. She hasn't really tried it. And that was only 20 minutes. She goes, I get bored really easily. I'm like, yeah, this is it. It's being able to sit with your emotions. I remember the hardest pose that I used to have to do in yoga was that shavasana, which is that lying down part at the end. I remember probably for the first at least 3 years, 2 or 3 years, that was easily the hardest pose that I had to do. And I was always in that state of, okay, we're finished. We've got like 5 minutes left. Why don't I might as well just go, right? What's the point of just lying down for 5 minutes? Just get going and get out of there. And I think this is where the suppression of emotions comes from, is that we are suppressed from those emotions because of distraction. Also, a lot of our emotional center stems, and we should really do a topic about the microbiome and the gut and serotonin and feelings that
definitely.
come from the stomach. And because of the way that we're eating, because of the sleep deprivation that a lot of people are living with, all of these things, whether it's the food, whether it's the chemicals in the environment, whether it's the lack of sleep, whether it's the distraction from social media or radio or TV, all of those things are actually inadvertently suppressing those emotional centers for us. And so we're not used to actually being able to sit with the emotion to suppress them in the first place, because they're being suppressed a lot of the time by other things.
Even in that example you've given, I would imagine that your was it your sister you said on the yoga? Was it your sister?
My mum.
Yeah, on the yoga poses. But the idea that I get bored in that pose, there's already an association that boredom is bad. So, why is that a bad thing? Would be a question you could come back with, but we make the assumption it's bad, therefore I'm not going to do the thing. Actually, we'll go back to microbiomes. I've got a funny little. I say funny. We're being open and vulnerable here, so I'll tell the audience something, and I think we should advance it. So I've been having some problems with wind, shall we say, right? So this has been on for years. I just thought this was a genuine problem, particularly in the evenings after like food and stuff like that. So I thought, there you go, I've admitted that live on the show. So I thought I'd have some intolerance tests done, which I've had done, and two things came out, and interestingly, they're not too dissimilar to yours, and I've going to try and completely cut them out of my diet for 3 months, then I'll retest. But on the particular scores that you get, I've done the Zoe thing as well, but that doesn't really give you great results. But I've done this one through a different company, blood test result, and anything over 20 would tell you that you've got a potential intolerance to a particular food group, and only 5 things came up. But out of that over 20, I had a particular score of 93 for cow's milk. And I had the second highest scoring thing was yeast, followed by gluten. So I've cut it out of my diet, and I have noticed miraculous changes in a very short period of time in terms of vibrancy, energy, problems disappearing. So yeah, we should talk about it, because I've got a full microbiome report that I can comment on when we go through it as well. And you know what? I think my wife's thankful for it, let's be honest, and my family probably.
Discussion with my mum the other day, and maybe my niece, because I was saying often flatulence, right, is actually a sign that something is not sitting well with you. It's not for me anyway, it's not a normal way of being to have flatulence, right? And that started probably when I changed my diet, is that I just noticed I didn't fart as much, and if I did fart, they were generally okay. Yesterday, for example, I had this weird mushroom concoction, which I knew I didn't really was going to sit well, and I noticed it. Like, I'm noticing it in my stool, the smell of my stool the next day, because normally it doesn't smell. Honestly, right? It's a phrase, right? Your shit doesn't stink, but actually, a lot of the time it doesn't. And when it does, it's because I've had a certain product. And so I could have probably told you that without the blood test, because probably most people are intolerant to the big ones are things like dairy and gluten, and there's a few other things.
Sure. So I was surprised to see it, but I had a 1-hour consultation with a gut microbiome expert, and she went into detail about the actual bacteria that's in my gut and what isn't. I did an assessment on all the different healthy bacteria that I've got and the ones that I'm missing. And she said you've got leakage. So when you have those foods, it leaks out of your intestines. Essentially, you haven't got the right things to do it, and that's what's causing all the flatulence, because it's you've got full leakage. So you need 3 months off, and then you can re-engage. So leaky gut. So we should have a conversation about it. But before we do, I know you've got a point to make. I want to go back to something before I forget it, because you talked about the yoga and a piece that went there, and I thought it was really interesting. And because it linked to, you were talking about the distraction piece, just to frame reference it. Otherwise I'll forget it, and I know you've got a thing you want to raise. 2 things. One is I saw a really, really good documentary and about coaching and the way we see the world and being positive mindset and all those things, funnily enough. But one point in there, he was talking about having a digital detox. And he said this individual, I can't remember his name, which is terrible because it was just kind of on a fly video. It wasn't something I planned to watch. But it wasn't my observations, just to make that bit clear. But what he said is he wants to do a documentary on just recording people in restaurants after couples, when one of the partner goes to the loo, and recording the time it takes for the other partner to get out their phone and be distracted. He said it's so rare when you look out for this. So anyone's listening to this, if you're going out for dinner with a partner, right, either look at yourself and be aware, which is what coaching is all about, raising awareness of how quickly you reach for your own phone, or how uncomfortable you are if you don't. And also keep an eye on the world around you and see how quickly they reach for their phones. The second there's an opportunity for ourselves to be distracted by our mobile devices, it's almost instantaneous that we get them out when someone leaves the room, when it's the kind of that polite moment to do so. We're so keen to see what notifications have come in, and yet we know that all those things can wait. I mean, years and years ago, people would travel, send letters that by pigeon or whatever it might be. It would take days to get there. We could deal with it. But now in the current world that we live in, it's like it has to be instant, or we need that distraction. And what I think is, in echoing what you said and what I fully agree with, we need to get clear what we actually want from life, and we need to learn to switch off that autopilot mode of distraction. And it links to one of my favorite quotes, which I've mentioned many times on the show before, which is, those who look outward dream and those who look inward awaken. And actually, if we put those phones aside, sit with ourselves, potentially in boredom, that's okay, and see what comes up, see what we think about, see what emotions come out, see what thoughts, as you say, it could spark creativity. You could spot something in a distance you've never spotted before. And this individual did go and test it. So he goes to a bar, doesn't take his phone, and his friends were all on their phones. He got there, they were kind of all on their phones at the same time. So he decided, well, they're all engaged in their phones, not in conversation. So he said, I haven't got my phone with me, so I'm going to go to the bar. And he had a chat with the barman in this story. And the barman was very, very depressed and just needed someone to speak to. And they had a really good conversation. And he said that if I'd had my phone with me, I can tell you now, I would have been the same as everyone else. I never would have had that conversation, which has led to various opportunities and things since. That's a really good example. But I just think, echoing what you'd said there, distraction is a massive problem. And
I'll give you an example of how people working have lost sales now, because I was in a store yesterday. I was going into one of these furniture stores, and it wasn't generally busy, but I saw 3 people who were working there, and they were all sat on one of these sofas. So it was like a sofa office bedding store. All 3 of them now were on their phones. Now, I don't know if they were on their phones looking up stock or anything else, because that was my first thought. I thought, oh, maybe they're looking up stock. But then there weren't any customers hovered near them to ask them. And I thought, I wonder if they're just on their phone because the store's quite empty and they're quite bored. And because of that, even though I didn't have a particular agenda of anything that I was looking for, wanted to buy, but I was expecting someone to come up to me at some point and say, hi, can I help you? Or do you need help with something? I actually walked out again. I walked out again really quickly, because I was like, and I had this thought. I just thought, we are in this society now where families do not know any other way than being on their phones. Like, my mum was babysitting my niece the other day, and she's 5 years old, totally addicted to the phone. Right, they're put in front of screens from such a young age. And the more and more I go, I know I've said this so many times, I'm becoming a Luddite, because I just see the issue. And I remember traveling, and you were talking about letters taking ages. I remember I wrote a postcard. So when I was traveling, this was back in 1999 to 2001, I traveled for 2 years after university. We didn't have phones. I mean, I went 5 months between speaking to my parents on the phone at one point. I wrote a postcard to a friend. It turned up actually 2 years later. It turned up after I'd already got back home. It was from Vietnam. I think I sent this postcard. And I remember going out, and I'd have my Lonely Planet. I'd have a book. I'd have like a Lonely Planet and a reading book. I'd usually always have 2 books on me. But you would engage a lot more in conversations. You'd do these 24-hour bus journeys with nothing but a Walkman and a book. That is a world where most people under the age of about 25, I guess, or 20, have no idea about. Have no idea. Even like,
they'd be fearful of it. They'd be fearful of it, Harry. They'd be scared of it.
You're fearful of being with your own thoughts. I've talked about in the past before my Vipassana meditation, which is this 10-day silent meditation retreat where you meditate for about 12 hours a day. You get up at 4 a.m. You don't speak to anyone. You don't look at anyone. You don't acknowledge anyone for 10 days. You don't even open the door for someone if you see someone walking behind you, because you're supposed to be in your own space. That is intense, because your thoughts are quite, what's the word? I guess they're quite, it's a bit like Luke Skywalker going in The Empire Strikes Back, and he's training with Yoda on that Dagobah 6 system or whatever it's called, and he has to go into this cave, and his worst nightmare is in that cave, and he's fighting Darth Vader in there, and he rips the mask off, and it turns out to be him, and he's having to be fighting himself. That's kind of what it's like with the meditation retreat and with thoughts in general, is that we're so afraid of what we might see on the inside that we will do our best not to say it. And I like your quote where you say, those that look outward dream, those who look inward awaken. And going back to wokeism, I'd just like to say it's about being awake, not woke. Most people are
Yeah,
not
I like
awake.
that. I think also, I don't know if you meant to do it or not, Harry, but you've managed to take the whole conversation full circle, right? Because what you're saying there really is we need to acknowledge all our emotions, not be fearful of them, which is kind of where in my mind dump at the start I was getting to, really. Don't suppress the emotions. We need to just recognize them. We need to acknowledge them. We need to appreciate them for what they are. We need to be comfortable in letting them go. But we can't let go of something if we're burying it. We can't let go of something if we're not even letting it come to the surface. And often, as you say, going back to the mobile phone thing, we're distracting ourselves. So somehow today we've managed to talk about apathy. We've managed to talk about flatulence, the smell of your stools, some movies, and bring it all the way full circle to 10-hour meditations. I'm quite impressed with that in an hour.
I thought that I was talking about when you were talking about gluten, and it was that leaky gut. And I know about this. I've written about it in the book I'm releasing, but I'm not an expert on this, but the world's foremost expert on gluten sensitivity, I think, is a guy called Alessandro Fasano, someone like that, out of East Coast of America. And he has an analogy, which I'm not going to do it justice, but something about how effectively gluten affects everyone. Everyone produces this enzyme called zonulin, or this protein called zonulin, when they eat gluten. And for some people, it might take 60 years or 80 years before that has an effect, and other people it might be immediate, but it's always there. It's always affecting everyone. So everyone is effectively having this. I guess he uses an analogy. I think of a rug of some sort, but I don't know how his analogy works. But somehow it peels away, or it pulls away at the rug, and then it grows back again for some people. But other people it doesn't grow back, and or it doesn't grow back as fast. And so at some point, it's going to break for someone. And so I always say to people who ask me about diet and things like that, and the general rules I would say is, if you cut out dairy and you cut out gluten, and you don't have to even do it for 3 months, as you're discovering, usually in 3 days or 7 days or 10 days, something like that, you're going to notice differences. You're going to notice differences, usually for the positive. So I'm glad that you're trying that experiment out, and I'm glad you've noticed something so obvious as literally like farting. And you'll start to notice that actually when you eat certain things, oh, that makes my fart smell like this. Maybe that's not going to agree with me.
I think it might link to the rug analogy you were calling, because I think the reason for the 3 months is that when you eat something all the time, and intolerance can be there because you're eating too much of the food, and it takes away the proteins that are there to kind of block the gut. So after 3 months, as you say, the rug grows back, I think the word you used, but it grows back. So I might be in 3 months' time, I can actually tolerate gluten again. But at the moment, if I keep hitting it and keep knocking it away, I can't. So you test it back slowly with one food at a time over a month. And if you feel fine, then you're okay.
Oh, sorry. I was going to suggest something to you. Again, I'm not an expert on leaky gut, although I think there is a website called healingleakygut.com or something like that. There are some good websites on leaky gut and how to heal it. But one of the things I do remember, because a friend of mine had an issue, but bone broth is usually very good. I'm not sure if bone broth is part of your
Yeah, they
diet.
recommended it. Oh, I'll tell you what, why don't we pause this conversation and have this next time? Because I've got all my feedback reports, including bone broth as a recommendation, so we can talk about why that's a good thing. I can give you some information about the specific gut microbiome that might be of interest to others to learn certain things, because I've been on a bit of a journey. You're a bit of an expert in nutrition anyway. As you know, I'm qualified in sports nutrition specifically, so we could probably have a good conversation. And, we're not experts necessarily in the microbiome, but I do think we've got views, and you've certainly got experiences in the way that you manage your diet that may result in some takeaways for our listeners.
Yeah, I think we'll have a conversation about that. I think it'll be very interesting. It's been a few years though since I looked into the whole gluten leaky gut correction stuff, but definitely bone broth is one of those things that is always up on the list. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we've nattered on for long enough. It's been a bit of a mind dump, but a good conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And you've got, I know, a big evening ahead of you. I also need to get to bed early. I need to be up by 5 tomorrow. I've got work in London, and I'm coming from Brighton, so I think it's going to take me 2 hours to get to where I need to get to. So I have to be there at 8. So I have to set off by 6. So that I'm not looking forward to such an early start, but yeah, it's all
I've
good.
given myself another 3 hours of work here, so it'll be a 9 till probably midnight day, but quite deliberate. I'm trying to get some specific projects out the way so that if I get it all done in one day, I'm a bit of all or nothing. That gives me my time back with my kids and family for the rest of the week rather than drip feed it. So I've asked for permission. I've got the permission. I'm going to be at my desk getting through the work. I have an hour with them now to have dinner and then back to my computer. So one of those days of not much excitement, but productivity, as you say. Connected to the work today.
Well, it has to happen, right? Because we need peaks and troughs in our lives, right? Times of extreme stress and then relaxation. That's how we work. Yeah, that's how we work. All right, excellent, nice one, buddy. So I look forward to our conversation, and good luck with the rest of your work. And thank you, listeners, for sticking with us on this call that went all over the place, but always came back full circle at the end.
And do check out, if you haven't, but we should mention as well, we have a YouTube channel, so do follow us at mindfulpaths /NDHY, and we're also on Twitter at mindfulpaths. We're on Instagram at mindful_paths_podcast. So wherever you prefer, following and getting the content, please do follow us, subscribe, do what you can. And of course, if you are currently listening to this in audio, just remind everybody, we record these in video. So if you want to see us in video form, actually connecting and looking at each other on screen, then that's where you can catch us on our YouTube channel, where we are also creating some shorts of the best bits of each show. So if you haven't got time to listen to the whole thing and just want to get kind of the key learnings, the key outputs, the things that we talk about, then check out our shorts, which I'm going to try and probably create a TikTok channel for as well, but all in good time. So whichever way you'd like to digest your content, please do follow us. It'd be amazing if all of you could write us a review or at least share the show with just one person to build our listeners. That'd be amazing as well. But for me, thank you, Harry.
Bye-bye.